A powerful mini-alien heiress pretended to be a poor beggar. Only one human was truly worthy. The crowded market was a blur of color and sound, a maze of bustling people and flashing neon lights. It was a typical day on the human colony planet, where commerce thrived in every corner of the city. From high-end shops to street vendors offering goods from all over the galaxy, the place was alive with energy. Amidst the chaos, few people noticed the small figure huddled in the corner of a dimly lit alley. She was no more than 3 feet tall, with features that were clearly not human. Her skin had a pale greenish hue, and her delicate features were framed by long, dark hair that hung loosely around her face. Her clothes were ragged, torn from days of wandering through the busy streets. She looked like any other beggar, a small, helpless creature, barely able to fend for herself. She sat with her knees drawn up to her chest, her arms wrapped tightly around her legs as she shivered in the cold. The tiny alien girl's eyes scanned the crowd, watching as people passed by without so much as a glance in her direction. To most, she was invisible. The world around her moved with a steady rhythm, unaware of her presence. In a way, this was exactly what she wanted. Her name was Lyra, though she had not shared that with anyone. She was the heir to one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy, a ruler in the making, with wealth, power, and influence beyond imagination. But none of that mattered here. On this planet, she was just another poor beggar, a tiny, weak thing that could easily be overlooked. The plan had been simple. She had come to this human colony, hiding her true identity to test them. The humans, so different from her own people, fascinated her. She had heard stories of their bravery, their compassion, their willingness to fight for what they believed in. She wanted to see it for herself. She had disguised herself, shedding the luxurious clothing of an heir and donning the tattered garments of a beggar. And so far, her plan had worked. The humans had passed her by without a second glance. Some offered her a coin or two, but most ignored her completely, lost in their own worlds. Lyra was a stranger here, invisible and unwanted. It was a feeling she wasn't accustomed to, but it gave her the opportunity to observe them without the weight of her title. Her thoughts were interrupted by a voice. "Hey, you okay?" She looked up, startled. A man stood before her, his face kind but worn with the signs of a hard life. His clothes were simple, nothing like the flashy outfits she had seen on the wealthier humans in the city, but they were clean and well cared for. He held a small bundle in his hands, and his gaze was focused entirely on her, as though she were the most important person in the room. Lyra didn't answer immediately. She was used to being ignored, used to people walking past her without a word. But there was something about this man that felt different. She couldn't place it, but there was a kindness in his eyes that caught her off guard. "You look like you could use some food," he continued, kneeling down in front of her. He unwrapped the bundle he had been holding and revealed a simple meal, bread, cheese, and a small cup of water. Lyra's stomach growled, betraying her hunger. She had been surviving on scraps, scavenging for anything she could find to eat, but she hadn't had a real meal in days. Still, she hesitated. She had to maintain her role as a beggar to remain hidden. If she accepted his kindness, would she lose control of the situation? But something about the way he offered it, so effortlessly, so without expectation, made her pause. He wasn't asking for anything in return. No coin, no promise of service, just a genuine desire to help. Her hand trembled as she reached out, taking the food from him. For a moment, their fingers brushed, and she felt a strange warmth in her chest, something she hadn't expected. It was more than just gratitude, it was a recognition. Something in her stirred as she met his gaze, and she felt herself relax, if only for a moment. "My name's Jonas," he said, sitting down beside her. "I know how tough it can get out here. Don't worry, we've all been there." Lyra blinked, surprised by his words. He had no idea who she was, what she was capable of. She could have revealed herself in that instant, used her powers, her title, to make him bow to her. But something inside her hesitated. She wanted to learn more about him, to understand what made this human different from the rest. Why had he stopped? Why had he cared? "My name is Lyra," she said, choosing a name that was close enough to her real one to feel familiar. It was the first time she had given anyone a name, and it felt strange on her tongue. Jonas smiled at her. "Nice to meet you, Lyra. You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to, but if you ever need help, don't hesitate to ask." Lyra nodded slowly, taking another bite of the food. It tasted better than anything she had eaten in a long time, and she savored it, her eyes never leaving Jonas. She studied him quietly, wondering what made him different from the others. Jonas didn't seem to mind the silence between them. He simply sat there, eating his own meal, his gaze fixed on the street ahead. It wasn't until the sun began to set that he spoke again. You know, I've seen a lot of people come and go through these streets. Some are kind, some are just trying to get by, but there's something about you. You're not like the others, you're not just some poor beggar, I can tell. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. Was it possible? Could he know? Had he figured it out already? She had been careful, so careful, to hide her true identity. No one, not even her own people, knew she had come to test humanity. But before she could respond, Jonas continued. Don't get me wrong, I don't think you're some kind of princess or anything. But I've got a feeling there's more to you than meets the eye, and if I'm right, I think we might be able to help each other. Lyra's mind raced. What did he mean? Was this some kind of test? Was he one of the humans she had been sent to observe? She knew she couldn't afford to make a mistake. She couldn't reveal who she truly was, at least not yet. I'm not sure what you mean, she said, her voice soft. Jonas chuckled, standing up. Don't worry about it. I've seen enough to know when someone's going through something. But I'm not going to push you. If you ever want to talk, I'll be here. Lyra watched him as he turned to leave, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. Who was this man? What made him so different from everyone else she had encountered? She had come to test humanity, but now she found herself wondering if she had just met the one human who could change everything. As she finished the last of the meal, she couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was the beginning of something far greater than she had anticipated. Jonas was not like the others. He was kind, yes, but there was something else. A quiet strength that radiated from him, something that called to her in a way she hadn't expected. For the first time since arriving on this planet, Lyra felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this test would not be so simple after all. The days that followed were filled with an odd sense of calm. Lyra continued her role as a poor beggar, sitting in the same corner of the marketplace each day, her tattered clothes barely keeping the cold out. Her meals were few and far between, but Jonas never failed to visit. At first, it was just to offer her food, a simple act of kindness that, in truth, was becoming something far more significant to her than she had expected. She watched him with growing interest. He never seemed rushed or impatient. He never asked for anything in return, and he always treated her as though she were someone worthy of his time, rather than someone to be discarded. His kindness was something she had not encountered in the leaders of her own people, much less the strangers she met in the galaxy. Each day, she sat in silence, observing the humans around her. Some of them, like Jonas, were genuinely kind. Others seemed focused on their own struggles, indifferent to the world around them. She had seen the worst of both, and as she had expected, the vast majority of humans were more focused on surviving than helping others. But then there was Jonas. He seemed different, gentle yet strong, thoughtful yet straightforward. There was something about him that drew her in. Lyra was used to being powerful. She had been raised as an heir to a great empire, surrounded by luxury, servants, and respect. She had known only her people's rules and their expectations for her, yet here in this human city she was nothing. No one knew her name or her face. She was just a small alien in rags, living like the lowest of the low. And perhaps that was what intrigued her the most. For the first time in her life, she was able to step away from the expectations of royalty. She could walk the streets without being treated as someone special. For once, she could see the world as it truly was, not through the eyes of an heir, but as a part of something larger. Jonas was not like the others. He didn't see her as a symbol of power. He saw her as a person. That's what had made her trust him enough to share her name, though it was a lie. Her true name, her royal identity, was hidden behind a veil. She couldn't afford to reveal it, not yet. Not until she knew more about him, and more about humanity as a whole. It was on the fourth day that Lyra began to notice something else about Jonas. It wasn't just his kindness that set him apart, it was his quiet strength. He moved through the marketplace with the same calmness, but his presence was different. He stood tall, even in the crowd, as if he carried something heavier than the others. And yet, he never once made anyone feel small or unimportant. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in a warm, golden light, Jonas sat next to her again, offering her a piece of bread he had brought from a local bakery. He didn't ask questions. He didn't push her to open up. He simply sat, offering her his quiet companionship. You know, he said, his voice gentle, I've been thinking about what you said the other day, about how tough things can get. I've seen a lot of people come through here, some with nothing to their name, others with a lot. But you're different. There's something about you that doesn't belong here. Lyra looked at him, her curiosity piqued. What do you mean? She asked, her voice soft. Jonas didn't look at her right away. His eyes were focused ahead on the people moving through the market. I've spent enough time on these streets to know when someone's pretending. You're not like the others who come here. You're not really a beggar. Lyra's heart raced. Had he figured her out? It had been a test, after all. She had disguised herself to see if any human would truly see her as more than her appearance. Jonas had noticed. He was the only one, but instead of feeling threatened or betrayed, she felt a strange sense of relief. Jonas wasn't afraid of her, nor was he trying to use her. He had simply recognized something she hadn't expected him to, her true nature. She forced herself to remain calm, to keep her voice steady. I'm not pretending, she said, though the words felt hollow even to her. Jonas finally turned to face her, and there was a quiet understanding in his eyes. I don't know your story, Lyra, but I know you're not just some homeless girl. You're stronger than that. I can see it. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The noise of the marketplace continued in the background, but for Lyra, everything had gone quiet. Her mind raced with questions. Was she truly ready to reveal herself to him? Was she prepared to tell him the truth about who she was? After all, she was the heir to a mighty empire. Her name carried weight among the stars. She was trained in the arts of leadership, diplomacy, and combat. The princess of her people, one who would one day rule entire star systems. But here, in this quiet corner of the marketplace, she was just a small, hungry girl sitting beside a stranger. And somehow, Jonas had seen through her disguise. The silence stretched on, and for the first time, Lyra felt vulnerable. She wasn't used to this feeling. Vulnerability was something her people did not allow. They were trained to be strong, to be leaders. Vulnerability meant weakness. Jonas seemed to sense her unease. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn piece of cloth. He held it out to her. I don't mean to make you uncomfortable, he said softly. I don't know, I've got this feeling you're not like the others. Lyra took the cloth from him, her fingers brushing against his. It wasn't much, a simple piece of fabric, perhaps used to wipe away sweat or dust. But for some reason, it felt like an offering, a gesture of respect, something that carried meaning beyond the object itself. I'm not like the others, she repeated quietly. Her voice was barely a whisper, but the words hung in the air between them. Jonas smiled gently. I don't know what you've been through, but I can tell you're stronger than you realize. Maybe you don't need to hide who you are. Lyra's heart raced again. Could she tell him the truth? Could she trust him with the knowledge of who she really was? Could she risk revealing the fact that she was not just a poor beggar, but the heir to a galaxy-spanning empire? But she wasn't ready, not yet. I can't tell you everything, she said after a long pause, her voice tinged with uncertainty. But maybe one day I will. Jonas nodded as though he understood, though he didn't press her for more. I'll be here whenever you're ready, but don't forget, you don't have to do this alone. Lyra looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. For the first time since arriving on this planet, she felt something inside her stir, a feeling she hadn't expected. It was a feeling of hope, of connection. Perhaps Jonas was right. Perhaps she didn't have to hide anymore. Perhaps, for the first time in her life, she could be something more than just the heir to a throne. Perhaps, in this strange new world, she could be a person. For the rest of the evening, they sat in silence, watching the stars begin to appear in the sky above them. Lyra didn't say much, but her thoughts were swirling. She had come here to observe humans, to test them. But now, as she sat next to Jonas, she realized that the test was not just for them. It was for her too. And as the market grew quieter and the night began to settle, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that, somehow, Jonas had already passed the first trial. As the days went on, Lyra found herself returning to the same corner of the marketplace. She had begun to make it a habit, sitting quietly on the ground, blending in with the street vendors and beggars who populated the busy market. She still wore the same tattered clothes, and though her stomach ached from hunger at times, she never complained. She had become accustomed to surviving on the scraps others discarded, but there was something different now. Jonas. Every day, without fail, Jonas would come. He always had something for her, bread, fruit, sometimes even a warm drink if the weather was cold. He never asked for anything in return. It was clear to Lyra that he wasn't doing it out of pity. He wasn't trying to prove some point or earn some reward. It was just who he was, kind, selfless, and without expectation. The more she observed him, the more she realized how unusual he was. There was no ulterior motive behind his actions. Most of the people who had passed by her in the past had done so out of a desire to feel good about themselves or because they believed they were doing their part in the world. But not Jonah's. He simply saw a need and filled it. In the beginning, she had tested him, of course. She had stayed quiet, watching how he would react to her. Would he grow tired of her? Would he stop coming when he realized she couldn't offer him anything in return? But with each passing day, he only grew more consistent in his kindness. He never once questioned her, never asked for an explanation about who she was or why she was there. That was the moment when Lyra's walls began to crack. She had lived her whole life in a palace where everyone around her had wanted something. Even her own family had seen her not as a person, but as a tool to achieve power. Every decision she made was weighed by its benefit to the empire. Yet here, in this bustling human city, she was nothing but a beggar, a small, insignificant being in the eyes of most. But Jonas had given her something she had never truly known before, genuine care. He was like a breath of fresh air in a world that had always felt suffocating. But what was even more surprising was that she found herself wanting to learn more about him. Who was this human who seemed to have such a pure heart? Why was he different from all the others? As the days passed, she allowed herself to be more vulnerable in his presence, though she kept her true identity hidden. She still couldn't reveal who she really was, not yet. She couldn't risk it. There was still so much she needed to understand about Jonas. What would he do if he found out the truth? Would his kindness remain? Or would it all be a lie built on the deception of who she appeared to be? One afternoon, after Jonas had offered her another meal, they sat side by side, watching the activity of the marketplace. The chatter of vendors, the hum of people rushing from one place to another, the sound of children playing, all of it faded into the background for Lyra. Her mind was elsewhere, focused on the man beside her. "You've been quiet lately," Jonas said, breaking the silence. His voice was gentle, as though he were trying not to pressure her into talking. Lyra looked up at him, startled. She hadn't realized how much time had passed. She had become lost in her own thoughts, lost in the feeling of being truly seen, of feeling like she mattered to someone. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. What could she say? She had spent so long hiding who she was, and now she was beginning to question the purpose of it all. "Just thinking," she said finally, her voice softer than usual, "about how different everything feels here." Jonas nodded, his gaze fixed on her. "Yeah, I know what you mean. Life here's hard for a lot of people, but there's something about it. I think it's the way everyone just keeps going, no matter what." Lyra could feel her heart begin to race. She had never allowed herself to consider the lives of ordinary people in this way. She had been raised in a palace, surrounded by wealth and luxury. But now, sitting here with Jonas, she saw the struggles of those around her. There was an odd beauty in the resilience of the humans here. They were not driven by power or status, but by the simple act of survival. "I used to think that power was everything," she said slowly, her voice barely a whisper. She hadn't intended to say it aloud, but the words just slipped out. That being in control, ruling others, was the most important thing. Jonas turned to her, his expression curious but patient. "And now?" Lyra hesitated, unsure of how to continue. She had never spoken so openly before. "Now I'm not so sure. I think there's more to life than just being powerful." Jonas smiled gently, though it wasn't a smile of triumph. It was a smile of understanding. "There's a lot more to life than that. You can't control everything, no matter how hard you try. It's the little things that matter most." Lyra looked at him, her heart beating faster. She had known it for a long time, but hearing him say it aloud made it feel real. She had spent her entire life in a world of control, of expectations, of constant pressure. But now, with Jonas, she felt a different kind of freedom, one that was quiet but powerful in its own way. That evening after Jonas had left, Lyra found herself staring at the stars. She had always loved looking up at the night sky. It reminded her of her home, of the empire she would one day rule. But tonight, something was different. She wasn't thinking about her responsibilities or her future. She was simply lost in the vastness of the universe, wondering where she fit into it all. She had come to Earth with a purpose, to observe humans, to test their worth. She had expected to find power, cruelty, and selfishness. Instead, she had found something far more complex: kindness, vulnerability, and the quiet strength of ordinary people. And most surprisingly, she had found herself questioning everything she had ever known. The next day, as she returned to her spot in the market, she couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. For the first time in a long time, she was excited to see Jonas. She didn't know why, but there was something about him that made her want to be near him, to learn more about him. She wasn't sure if it was just his kindness, or if it was something more, something she couldn't put into words yet. When Jonas appeared later that afternoon, as he always did, Lyra was struck by how natural it felt. She didn't need to hide anymore. She didn't need to pretend to be someone she was. He had already seen through her facade, and for some reason that made her feel lighter. "Hey," he greeted her with his usual warmth. "How are you doing today?" Lyra smiled softly, surprised by how comfortable she felt around him. "Better," she said. "I'm starting to understand things differently." Jonas raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Lyra paused for a moment before answering, trying to find the right words. "I think I've spent too much of my life hiding, trying to be someone I'm not. I've always been afraid of what people would think if they knew the real me. But maybe I don't need to hide anymore." Jonas didn't say anything for a moment. Instead, he just sat down next to her, offering her the food he had brought. She took it without hesitation, her eyes never leaving him. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt seen for who she truly was, not as an heir, not as a test subject, but as Lyra, a person. "Maybe you don't," Jonas said finally, his voice soft. "But when you're ready, you can tell me anything." Lyra looked at him, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something she wasn't ready to acknowledge just yet. She had come to Earth to test humanity, but in the process, she had found something unexpected, someone who saw her for who she truly was. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid. The days continued to pass, each one blending into the next as Lyra became more accustomed to her life on this strange planet. She still sat in the same corner of the marketplace, though her routine had changed. She no longer sat in silence, pretending to be invisible. With Jonas visiting her every day, their quiet conversations had become a source of comfort. It was as though the world around her had faded into the background, and the only thing that mattered was the time they spent together. Jonas had begun to share more about his life as well, his struggles, his dreams, his past. His words were simple, but there was a depth to them, a sincerity that Lyra found captivating. He wasn't a man of many words, but the ones he spoke were always honest, always grounded in the reality of his life. Lyra found herself opening up to him more as well, though she was careful not to reveal too much. She couldn't risk exposing her true identity, not yet. But little by little, she began to trust him. She told him about her journey to this planet, about her desire to understand humanity, to test them. She had expected to find cruelty and selfishness, traits she had seen in her own people, in the rulers of her empire. But instead, she had found kindness. In Jonas, she had found a man who was willing to help a stranger without expecting anything in return. She had never known anyone like him. "I've been thinking," Lyra said one evening, as the two of them sat together beneath the stars. The market had quieted down, and the noise of the day was replaced by the gentle hum of the city at night. Jonas turned to look at her, his eyes attentive. "What's on your mind?" She hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to express the thoughts that had been swirling in her mind. "I came here to test you to see if humans are as selfish as they say, but now I'm starting to wonder if I was wrong. Maybe the real test was for me, not for you." Jonas raised an eyebrow, his expression softening. "What do you mean?" Lyra looked up at the stars, feeling a sense of vulnerability she hadn't expected. "I thought power was everything," she said quietly. "I thought that being in control, ruling others, was the only way to live. But now, I don't know, I don't think that's true anymore." Jonas didn't speak right away. He simply let her words hang in the air, as if giving her time to process them. Finally, after a long pause, he spoke. "I've learned that power isn't always what it seems. Sometimes it's the people who don't have it who understand life the most. People like you, Lyra, you have the power to change the world, but it's your heart that makes you different. That's what makes you stand out." Lyra turned to him, her heart racing. She had always believed that her power was her defining trait, but Jonas had seen beyond that. He saw her for who she was, not for her title or her abilities. And somehow, that made her feel both lighter and heavier at the same time. She opened her mouth to respond, but found herself at a loss for words. She didn't know how to explain what she was feeling, didn't know how to articulate the emotions that had begun to grow inside her. All she knew was that everything had changed since meeting him. Jonas smiled, as though he could see the confusion in her eyes. "You don't have to say anything. I know you're still figuring things out, but just know that you don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders alone." Lyra swallowed hard. She had never allowed herself to lean on anyone before, never allowed herself to trust someone like this. But with Jonas, it felt different. She felt safe. And for the first time in a long time, she wanted to open up, to share her true self with him, but fear still held her back. What if he couldn't handle the truth? What if he rejected her once he knew who she really was? She shook her head, trying to push those thoughts aside. She wasn't ready yet. There was still so much to figure out. The following day, as Lyra sat in her usual spot, she noticed something unusual. The marketplace was busier than usual, and there was a sense of tension in the air. People moved quickly, their eyes darting around nervously. Lyra looked up, trying to figure out what was happening. That's when she saw them, a group of soldiers dressed in the uniforms of a private security force, moving swiftly through the crowd. Jonas appeared a few minutes later, his face tense. He walked straight to her, his eyes scanning the crowd before landing on her. "Something's going on," he said quietly. "I don't know what it is, but I've seen these guys around before. They're trouble." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She had never seen the soldiers in this part of the city before. They were too well-equipped, too organized to be ordinary security. She knew immediately that something wasn't right. But what could she do? She was just a beggar after all. She had no power here. Jonas's voice brought her back to reality. "We need to move," he said urgently. "They're coming this way." Before she could protest, he grabbed her hand and pulled her to her feet. "Come on," he urged, his grip firm but gentle. "We need to get you out of here." Lyra felt a surge of panic rise in her chest. She didn't know where they were going, but she trusted Jonas. She had to. He was the only person who had shown her kindness in a world that often seemed cold and indifferent. They ducked into a narrow alley, weaving through the maze of streets as the soldiers' footsteps echoed behind them. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know why the soldiers were after them, but she could feel the danger closing in. Jonas kept his hand firmly around hers, guiding her through the streets. "Stay close," he muttered. "We'll find a place to hide, just trust me." Lyra nodded, her breath coming in short gasps as they turned down another alley. They had to move quickly. She couldn't afford to be caught by the soldiers. Not now. After what felt like an eternity, they finally reached a small, secluded building. Jonas pushed open a door at the back, leading them into a dimly lit room. He quickly locked the door behind them and turned to Lyra, his face etched with worry. "We should be safe here for now," he said, though there was an edge of uncertainty in his voice. "I don't know what's going on, but I think it's best we stay hidden for a while." Lyra nodded, her heart still racing. She was scared, but there was something comforting about being here with Jonas. He had always been there for her, and now, in this moment of crisis, she realized just how much he meant to her. "I don't know why they're after us," she said quietly, her voice shaking. "But I'm glad you were here." Jonas smiled, though his eyes were full of concern. "I'll always be here," he said, his voice steady. "You don't have to face this alone." Lyra felt a lump form in her throat. She had never relied on anyone before, but in this moment with Jonas by her side, she knew she didn't have to. As they sat in the dimly lit room, Lyra's mind raced. What had just happened? Why had those soldiers been looking for them, and what did it mean for her? But for now, there was only one thing she knew for sure. Jonas was her ally, and she wasn't alone anymore. The silence in the room was thick with tension. Lyra sat on a worn-out chair in the corner, her mind still racing from the chaos outside. The sound of the soldiers' footsteps echoed in her ears, even though they had long since disappeared. Jonas paced back and forth, his brow furrowed with worry. Lyra couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. The soldiers, those men in uniforms, had been after them. But why, she had no idea, and the uncertainty gnawed at her. She looked up at Jonas, whose eyes were darting between the locked door and the dimly lit room. "We can't stay here forever," Jonas finally said, his voice low. "They'll be looking for us. We need a plan." Lyra nodded. She understood the danger, but the idea of leaving this small, hidden place was terrifying. She didn't know where to go, and she wasn't sure if she could trust anyone else. Not after everything she had seen. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jonas paused, clearly thinking. "First, we need to find out what's going on. If they're after us, it's because someone knows something. We can't just keep running. We need answers." Lyra felt a chill run down her spine. She had been keeping a low profile for days, but now it felt like the world was closing in on her. She wasn't just a beggar anymore. She was someone people were looking for, someone who had caught the attention of dangerous forces. She had never imagined that her little experiment, her decision to blend in with the humans, would lead to this. "What if they find us?" she asked, her voice cracking. "What if they find me?" Jonas knelt beside her, his gaze steady and reassuring. "They won't find us if we stay hidden. We just need to stay calm and figure out our next move." Lyra took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She had faced challenges before, but this was different. This wasn't some diplomatic meeting or a battle for control. This was about survival. "Do you know who they are?" she asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. Jonas stood up and began pacing again. "I've seen them before. They're part of a private security force. I don't know who they work for, but I've heard rumors." "They're not good people." "Rumors?" Lyra's eyes narrowed. She wasn't sure how much she could trust rumors. But then again, Jonas had proven himself reliable so far. "I've heard they're mercenaries hired by the highest bidder," Jonas explained. "They're ruthless and they don't ask questions. If they're after us, it means someone important wants something from you, and that's not good." Lyra felt a wave of panic rise in her chest. She hadn't expected this. She had been hiding her identity, pretending to be someone she was. She had come to this planet to test the humans, to see if they were worthy of her trust. But now she realized that the situation was far more complicated than she had anticipated. "Someone wants something from me?" she asked, her voice shaking. "But I'm just a beggar." Jonas stopped pacing and looked at her, his expression serious. "You're not just a beggar, you're someone important, whether you like it or not. I don't know who's behind this, but they're not going to stop looking for you until they get what they want." Lyra swallowed hard. She could feel the weight of his words, and they sent a chill through her. She had never felt more vulnerable in her life. She had come to this planet thinking she was safe, that she could hide in plain sight. But now she knew that wasn't true. She stood up slowly, her mind racing. "What do we do now?" she asked, the question barely escaping her lips. Jonas took a deep breath, his eyes meeting hers. "First, we lay low. We stay here for now. The last thing we need is to attract attention, but we can't stay hidden forever. We need to find out who's behind this and why they're after you." Lyra nodded, though the uncertainty gnawed at her. She wasn't used to feeling powerless. She had been raised to be strong, to lead her people. But here, in this small, hidden room, she was just another person trying to survive. The hours seemed to stretch on endlessly. Lyra and Jonas barely spoke, each lost in their own thoughts. The only sound in the room was the occasional creak of the old floorboards beneath them and the distant hum of the city outside. The world felt strangely far away, as though time itself had slowed down. At some point, Jonas stood up abruptly, breaking the silence. "We can't stay cooped up here forever," he said, his voice firm. "I'll go out and try to gather information. You stay here. If anyone comes, don't open the door for anyone, understood?" Lyra felt a pang of fear. She didn't want to be left alone, not now, not with everything happening around her. But she knew Jonas was right. They couldn't stay in hiding forever. She had to trust him. "I understand," she said quietly, though her voice trembled slightly. Jonas gave her a reassuring smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I'll be back as soon as I can. Just stay safe." Lyra watched as he slipped out of the door, his figure disappearing into the shadows. She felt a knot form in her stomach as the door closed behind him. Alone. The word echoed in her mind, and she felt a deep sense of vulnerability wash over her. She had never truly been alone before. Not like this. Not without anyone to protect her. For what felt like hours, Lyra sat in the dim light of the room, her thoughts racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that the world she had once known was slipping further and further from her grasp. And then, the sound of footsteps outside the door jolted her out of her thoughts. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Had they found her? Had they come for her? The footsteps stopped, and for a long moment there was silence. Then a knock at the door. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She had been told not to open the door, but she couldn't help herself. She felt an odd pull, an urge to see who was on the other side. Another knock. This time it was louder, more urgent. She hesitated. "Lyra," a voice called from the other side. The voice was familiar, calm, and steady. It was Jonas. Her heart skipped a beat. She rushed to the door and unlocked it, throwing it open to find him standing there, looking both relieved and worried. "I thought you weren't coming back," Lyra whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Jonas smiled softly, stepping inside. "I'm here. I told you I'd be back." But we've got to go. Now. Lyra felt a surge of fear again, but she didn't question him. She followed him quickly, her heart racing as they made their way down the darkened alleyways, slipping through the shadows. The air was thick with tension, and Lyra could feel the weight of what was happening pressing down on her. Jonas didn't say anything as they moved, but Lyra could see the determination in his eyes. Whatever was happening, whatever danger they were facing, Jonas was ready to face it head-on. They reached a small, hidden transport dock, and Jonas turned to her. "Get in, we're leaving." Lyra's mind raced. She knew she had to go. There was no time to think, no time to question. She climbed into the small shuttle beside him, and within moments they were soaring into the sky, leaving the city behind. As the stars stretched out before them, Lyra felt a sense of relief wash over her. For the first time in days, she could breathe. She wasn't sure where they were going or what would happen next, but one thing was certain: she wasn't alone anymore. And maybe, for the first time in her life, that was enough.